Hey you guys, it's me again. So we're gonna do a lecture really quickly on Stalin and his methods of control that he used, and we're going to kind of like look at how does it compare to the four different methods of control that we learned about yesterday in the lecture. So police terror, propaganda, censorship, ethnic persecution, and um, indoctrination. So that's a plan for today. I'm going to give the lecture. It's going to be about 10 minutes, and then you guys have to go to the quiz and you guys have to answer one question to get credit for watching the lecture. So that's the plan. So I'm going to pull this up. You guys can continue taking notes in the same place that you have been taking notes. So we're going to do just a case study on this man, Joseph Stalin. I know that you guys are familiar with him because of the activities we did in the Russian Revolution last unit, but I'm going to really quickly run through that revolution real quick. So this guy here, Lenin, overthrew the Tsar, and after they captured him and then they withdrew from World War One, the Tsar's family was held captive for a while and then brutally murdered. You guys remember this guy here, Rasputin, who had a lot of power in the Russian court, and was one of the reasons that the Tsar was overthrown. Then you guys also remember, this is actually the basement where the Tsar's family was murdered. They were taken down here. They said they were going to be taking a family photograph. So they all lined up here on the wall, and then a firing squad fired on them, and then acid was poured on their bodies afterwards. So it was a brutal murder, and you guys remember all of that from what we did in the Russian Revolution. So I'm not going to play this video so it doesn't copyright me, but pretty much this video is showing a bunch of people weeping at Stalin's funeral. So the question is, so Stalin, as you guys know from when we talked about the Russian Revolution, he worked underneath Lenin. When Lenin died, he warned the Russian people and said, be careful of this guy Stalin. I don't think he should have power because I don't know that he knows what to do with it. And coming from a guy like Lenin, that's a scary thought for a guy like Lenin to say, hey, watch out for Stalin. But Stalin effectively takes control of Russia after, or I guess the Soviet Union at this point in time, after Lenin dies. And in the course of Stalin's very long rule over the Soviet Union, 25 million people, that's like maybe even a low estimate, died under Stalin's rule. But this video shows a bunch of people weeping at his funeral. That is my daughter wanting to come up on the bed with me. Danny, come over here. 25 million people died under his rule, but people were still so sad. So the question is, how can you get to that point? Sorry, hold on. I have somebody that wants to say hi. Danny, say hi. Can you wave? Say hi, guys. Can you talk to them? Talking. What do you want to say? Do you want to teach them about history? Yeah? Danny, can you say Stalin? Good. Danny, can you say totalitarianism? Perfect. It's hard to say for me too, so don't blame her. Okay, I'm going to send her back with my husband so I can finish the lecture, but this is your treat for today. Danny, say bye-bye. Bye-bye. Okay. Whoops, ignore my slow computer. Okay. So anyway, we're going to look into how do you have that much control over a population that you could be responsible for the deaths of 25 million people and still people love you. So we're going to look at how he kind of like manipulated his image My husband is now tickling my daughter, so that is where the giggles are coming from. Okay, so Stalin, you guys, the first one we're going to look at is propaganda. So Stalin had this image, and he wanted to make sure he crafted it very carefully. He wanted to portray himself as the father of Russia. So literally every propaganda piece that you saw, there was always little children that were like adoringly looking up to Stalin, being like, wow, he is such a good, honorable man. Thankfully, we have him as this leader, as this figure, as this loving father. His image was in every single home. It was mandated, but people like fully embraced it. He was really kind of like revered as this like incredible leader. But he also kind of created these propaganda films where he sort of like rewrote history. So Stalin was involved in the Russian Revolution, but did not play a big leadership role. He legitimately like rewrote history in these films to make it look like he was like side by side with Lenin, like making these decisions, like way more important than he was in the actual revolution. And another thing that he did, you guys, this is actually an actor that played Stalin. And this actor was a little bit younger, a little more handsome than Stalin actually was. And he played him in every film. So every time like he was shown in a film, he was kind of like, everyone like just thought that this was Stalin, was actually Stalin, but it wasn't. Whenever there was like some sort of like news or something shown, he always was like very careful to like he made them do so many shoots, so many shots, to make sure that he looked okay. He was always like very conscious because he felt like he had a double chin, so he always like wanted to make sure he had like the best angle. But he was constantly putting out these propaganda films, constantly trying to portray himself in the best light, and then even going back and rewriting history and kind of making himself seem like more significant than he was. So those are all examples of propaganda. Here you guys can see more of that like father figure image. This one, you guys, kind of falls under, I suppose you could say, like the police terror side of it. So you guys learned about the Great Purge, that there were like 13 million people that were killed in his purges. Here you guys can see people that are being fired at actually and falling into this pit. So there were millions of people that were killed in these purges. And again, with this police terror, it was like you never knew if you were going to be reported. And the whole goal of these purges were to get rid of enemies. So he started with like political enemies, people that could challenge his authority, but then went to anybody that was criticizing his regime, like really wanting to silence that. So this could also fall under censorship in terms of like just like quieting and silencing anybody that would challenge him. So they eliminated any reported enemies. Now, the reason I have reported here in like kind of quotation marks is because there were a lot of people that became very paranoid during this time. And Stalin was so smart in the sense that he would tell like his police force to go to an area and say, find people and say, you are going to be arrested. I need 5 names. And if they couldn't come up with 5 names, they would say, you're going to be the 5th name. Does that make sense? Like if you only came up with 4 names, then they would assume, well, how come you couldn't find 5? We know that there's more enemies of the state. You must be an enemy of the state. And so what they did is they got people in neighborhoods and buildings and everything. People were reporting on their families. People were reporting on people that had grudges, they had grudges against, saying that, oh yeah, I heard this person speaking bad. I heard this person like mocked the image of Stalin, or whatever it was, tattletelling on neighbors, family, friends, out of fear that they were going to get reported on themselves. And so there was this crazy level of paranoia. This book right here, you guys, Stalin would sign off. He would get a list of names every single night, and he would go through the list of names, and he would either scratch out names if he's like, no, I think they're fine, or he would add names to the list. This was a book, and literally, you guys, there's pages and pages and pages and pages of people's names. Like, he was signing off on all of this. He was the one that was like, yep, send them to the either the labor camps where a lot of people died, which we'll talk about in a second, or just eliminate them. And he was so smart because every time people started to get like, wait, something isn't right, this isn't how things are supposed to be, Stalin would get on the news and say, you are right, things have gotten out of hand in our country, and he would blame his chief of police. And he would say, this person has gone outside of my orders. This person is not following my commands. I will take care of the problem. And then the chief of police would be blamed and usually killed, and then there wouldn't be any like reports or any deaths for a while, and everybody would be like, wow, Stalin really saved us, when really he was the one orchestrating it all. So I want to talk about censorship a little bit to kind of like the next level. So I want you guys to look at these two images. This man right here, I want you to like spot the difference. This man right here is Leon Trotsky, which was one of Stalin's rivals, the one that actually Lenin recommended to take over leadership of Russia. Here he is right next to Lenin during the Russian Revolution. And Stalin hated Trotsky. He labeled anybody that was like an enemy a Trotskyist. So if you were like a Trotskyist, you were like an enemy. It kind of became this derogatory term. They actually went back and doctored images to like remove him from the image. So you guys can see he's taken out of these pictures. Here you guys can see Trotsky is. All they did here is added this little like addition to the pictures. So it's pretty wild the amount of like censorship that they used. I want to talk about what Stalin actually did in Russia. So this is, or in the Soviet Union at this time. So this is less having to do with like the methods of control. Well, kind of. They sort of all work together. But what Stalin created in Russia was a command, or in the Soviet Union, sorry, I keep saying Russia, was a command economy. So the government made all economic decisions. The reason that he took full control of the economy is because he felt like when he surveyed sort of the rest of the world, and when he looked at Russia's performance in World War I, he was like, we are way behind all of these other advanced countries in the world, and we have to make up this distance. So he says we're about 50 or 100 years behind the advanced countries. We must make good this distance in 10 years. So he's pretty much going to try to industrialize Russia in a crazy quick period of time so that they can catch up with the other modern countries of the world. So he created these 5-year plans, which were sort of like these 5-year plans, these sort of like milestone markers, these sort of quotas that they were going to have to reach by the end of these 5 years. But the quotas were impossibly high, like for steel, coal, oil, electricity, etc. So in order to reach those quotas, to make enough steel, to get enough coal, to find enough oil, to do all this stuff, in order to do that, they had to shut down other parts of their economy. So they limited the production of consumer goods. And this is what a totalitarian state can do. They're like, oh, yeah, maybe people need to shop for groceries, but instead of, like providing that service and like, allowing grocery stores to run, well, they're going to say, we're not going to focus on that right now. We're going to focus on the economy. So we're going to focus all of our attention on producing steel, coal, oil, that sort of stuff. So they really cut back on the production of consumer goods. So like, factories, any kind of factory that made consumer goods. So anything that you would buy, clothing, shoes, whatever, they limited that to such an extreme measure that there were such shortages in Russia. But they were producing lots of steel and coal and oil, but it came at the expense of so many people's lives. That's where so many people in Russia died of starvation, because they were not getting these consumer goods that they needed. And in order to get all those resources, and this is part of the communism in Russia, was the government was able to collectivize and form these collective farms. So they forced everybody, and they started with the wealthy farmers and then moved on down the line. They forced them to work, instead of on their own farms, on their own land, making their own products. They worked on state farms, and those state farms, they had to all work together on these farms. Everybody was supposedly equal, even though that wasn't the case in Russia. They had to work on these state farms, and they didn't get the product of their labor themselves. Everything they owned privately was taken and seized. And if you refused to work on these state farms, if you were a perceived enemy of the state, if your name was on that list and you didn't get executed, you were sent to labor camps, which were called gulags. These labor camps, you guys, were just camps that were producing all of these products that Russia needed to industrialize. So, actually, there was a statistic that in 1 year, um, Russia exported 5 million tons of grain, which is a wild amount. This is all the grain that was produced on these state farms. Exported 5 million tons, and in that same year, 5 million Russians died. So they're making a ton. It's just not going to the people. It's going to buying all the, industrial types of things that you need to get your country industrialized. So these labor camps were other places where, again, they're just working to build whatever Stalin wants or needs to modernize Russia. And the wild thing about these camps, you guys, the conditions were absolutely terrible. But just to show you guys, and there's actually like letter proof of this, just to show you how crazy it was, the people in these labor camps wrote letters daily to Stalin, being like, if only Stalin knew, he would save us from this terrible situation. People would pray to Stalin. People would send him those letters saying, can you rescue us from this situation? You're our savior. If you only knew what was going on. And what they had no clue about was that Stalin was the one that was responsible for them being there in the first place. That is when you have effective indoctrination, censorship, propaganda, etc. Stalin had such a firm grip on this, on his nation. We're not going to watch this. If you guys want to go to YouTube and watch Joseph Stalin, Man of Steel, if you're curious, it's an interesting documentary that shows what he does. But if you guys look here, there were crazy famines because of all the crops that were seized. There are really heartbreaking stories, you guys, of people and their situations in the Soviet Union at this time, and just the starvation. I mean, you don't have 6 million perish in a famine. That's just a terrible place to be. And if you guys watch this documentary, it's like an hour long. You totally don't have to, but if you want to look it up on YouTube, go ahead and do it. You guys will hear actually some of those firsthand stories about even like cannibalism and having to like choose between like which children were going to survive. And it was truly heartbreaking. So anyway, you guys, that's the case study on Stalin. So I hope you guys took good notes. Don't forget to go to Canvas and answer that one question quiz to get points for watching the lecture. That's all. See you guys tomorrow.